Fab. Yeah, chat is so okay. This is basically we're starting now. I assume we're starting now. So a couple of logistical things. Chat is turned off in Zoom, but you do have reactions. I may not see them because I can only see some of you at a time. Chat is disabled. So if you have a question, go into the Discord chat. I am like second monitoring the Discord chat on another machine. So you can ask a question in the Discord chat. If I don't get it through this session, I will be on the Discord chat throughout the conference, really as long as that Discord server is around. If you ping me on the Discord server, I'll probably see it. Couple of other logistics things. So it is 10:03 where I am, 3 minutes after hour here. This is supposed to go till 11:30, so we have about 90 minutes my time. We will take a break no matter where we are. I'm going to say this up front. We will break at 10:40, halfway through for about 10 minutes, about 10:40 for about 10 minutes. This is to forestall somebody asking when are we taking a break? We'll stop wherever we are. So I think we'll just start. I can't tell whether now that I have my screen shared, I can't tell whether people are still coming in or not. It looks like people still are. We'll go one more minute. Yeah. Okay. Again, if you have questions or comments, go into the Discord chat. There's a lot we're going to be covering a lot here and going kind of quick. So hopefully it will be manageable because there's not a lot of these effects we're going to be talking about don't take much code. So there won't be much to follow anyway, we'll get to that when we start. Okay. Thank you all for attending from wherever you are around the world. I hope you have a good virtual RailsConf, and I'm sad that I can't see you all in person, but happy to see all of you on my screen. And welcome to this. What I want to talk about here is, I want to talk about the web and web applications and things like that. Once upon a time, the web was simple, or at least simpler. I've been doing web applications for a like frighteningly long time at this point. And once upon a time, the main thing that we did was the client would make a request to a server. The server would return HTML. The browser would display that HTML, an entire page. And it was simple, and we made it complicated at the time, but it seemed hard. And then we made it harder. It got less simple over time. We started using Ajax and then single page apps, and we set up a separate workflow where the client makes a request, the server returns data, and the client then takes that data and generates HTML and generates the site, and in some cases, in a single page app case, routes through the site to display the site to the user. And that, I think, has kind of a 3 left turns to go right kind of feel to it for me a lot of the time. Browsers are good at browsing. At the same time, those client-side applications give you a lot of power. They make some things possible on the client side that are hard to do, or at least have always felt like they are hard to do in a traditional browser setup. With that in mind, we now have Hotwire, which is HTML over the wire, and it is an attempt from the Basecamp team to make it as simple to do client-side interactions and rich, beautiful, modern-looking client-side interactions with server-side rendering and without writing a whole ton of JavaScript. I am Noel Rappin. You can follow me on Twitter at NoelRapp. I work at Root Insurance. You can follow them at joinroot.com if you want insurance, or if you want an engineering job, we're hiring somewhere on that page. You can find me at noelrappin.com. There's a newsletter there. And again, there's the Discord chat, Hotwire HTML over the wire. Actually, they're all dashes, not underscores, now that I look at this. But if you're on the Discord server, I think you'll be able to find it. So the way this is going to work is that we are going to, there is a lot more to cover in the Git repo than we are actually going to get to in this this presentation. However, the Git repo is like set up and the slides are set up to guide you through the rest of it. So like feel free to use it after this session to keep going. To explore stimulus. I think we'll be able to get through all or most of the turbo stuff and probably not to some of the stimulus stuff. But you can continue to use this code base as a setup to explore stimulus. Everything's been pre-installed and it should be relatively smooth to move forward with it. So if you want to follow along, the repo, which is also in the Discord, it's RailsConf 2021 Hotwire. The way this is set up is there are 8 branches, workshop 01 through workshop 08, that have different succeeding sessions of the code. If you want to type along in your own editor and follow along, you are welcome to do that. All of the code changes are in the slides. So if you look at the slides markdown file, if you want to cut and paste, or you can look through the Git. I tried to set up the repo so that you could see the changes from branch to branch pretty easily, and you can use that to go back and forth. If you want to follow along just by, these slides also in the repo is a PDF. If you don't want to look at the shared screen, the markdown has all of the code changes. Each step has a different branch. If you want to just follow along by going from branch to branch and looking at the code, that's great. Running it, whatever works for you. I tried to make this as easy to follow as possible. So thank you. This is the sample application. It is a pretend concert series. All the data came from fakers like band names. The concert titles are fakers book names. And I think that the venues are faker college names, I think. It's just set up. Everybody should have the same database because it's a binary in the repo. All we're going to do here is we're going to be looking at this schedule page. Let me actually show it in the browser. What the page allows you to, we have a list of potentially of favorite concerts. The page currently allows you to make a concert a favorite and remove a concert from favorite. And you can also bounce to an edit page and come back to a display page that we're not going to be looking at, and also come back here to the list of the schedule page. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at this favorite functionality, which I want to stress right now works. It reloads the entire page, which you can see on the left of my screen. You can see the log as I click through. You can see it's doing a full page reload. We can look at the network log too, which has some downsides, and we're going to turn that to be more of a JavaScript client-side interaction using Hotwire. Okay. Also, if you have the application, the login is areader@example.com, and the password is awesome. And again, everybody should have the same database binary, so it should work for all of you. Okay. It's not a full app. It's got a couple of edit things. Like, it's not production ready by any stretch of the imagination. It's just here. It's here for sample purposes. But we're going to augment it with Hotwire. So let's talk about what Hotwire is. There are actually 3 parts to Hotwire, 2 of which have been released. They are Turbo and Stimulus. The third part is Strata, and that is for interaction with native devices. It hasn't been fully released yet, and we're not going to be talking about it here. Hotwire allows you to do server-side rendering, which means that the primary interaction between the server and the client is the server sending HTML, and the Turbo library in particular is there to do things with the HTML other than re-render the entire page. And Stimulus is there to catch up on some client-side bits and bobs when you need to handle click events or things like that on the user side. So there's sort of a hierarchy of things that the way that Hotwire wants you to see the world. The best thing to do is return regular HTML. The next best thing to do is a navigation through Turbo Frames, which we will talk about in a moment. The next best thing to do is to use Turbo Stream, which we'll also talk about. And then after that, only exhausted those things, the plan here is to do a client-side CSS switch, using stimulus, a generic stimulus controller or a more specific controller here. The idea is that Hotwire enables you to use the HTML that you are already writing server side and repurpose it for client effects. So the idea here is to write as little JavaScript, custom JavaScript as possible, and let Turbo use the Turbo family of tools, use the code, repurpose the view layer that you are already writing in order to get client-side effects. So Turbo has three parts. The first part is Turbo Drive, which is essentially a rebranding of what used to be called Turbo Links. It does the same thing. What Turbo Drive does is it automatically captures navigation within the site and handles it in the background. So if you do a form submit, or if you do a link within your site within the site, Turbo Drive captures the request, takes the response, and pulls the body out of the response and updates the inner HTML of the body DOM without doing a full page load. The effect of that is that you get, and particularly in a case where you're not changing much of the page at all, it is much less distracting to the user. There's much less flicker. You can actually see here, this is already using Turbo Drive, and it is refreshing the page using Turbo Drive. And most of the page does not flicker as I update and remove this. It really does look, it doesn't look like a full page refresh is happening, even though a full page refresh is actually happening. Turbo Drive is great. It has pretty much happens for free. You don't have to do anything to get it to work. It makes the page transition appear faster, but it is limited to drawing the entire page. And it also has some strange effects when you interact with other JavaScript libraries that expect page loaded events. Because Turbo Drive doesn't deliver page loaded events, delivers its own load events that you have to then sort of capture. Those are the main reasons why people sometimes have been reluctant to add Turbo Links and Turbo Drive to their applications. But I think that a lot of that can be a little I guess it's overstated if you're doing a basic Rails application. If you're really doing a client-side, server-side application, then you probably don't want it. The question on the site, does Turbo use a virtual DOM like React? No. Turbo is pretty simple. It is parsing the response for the body tag, and it's doing a pretty straightforward, I believe it's doing a pretty straightforward inner HTML replacement. I definitely know that's what Turbo Frames and Turbo Streams do. So one question is here, what if we only want to refresh part of a page? So for example, one thing we might want to do is have this edit button allow us to inline edit the concert rather than take us to a separate page. We might want it to have that edit form display inline, right here on the same schedule page without forcing us to bounce off of the page. And in order to do that, we use the second feature of Turbo, which is called Turbo Frames. The naming is a little, so there's three pieces of Turbo and they all behave a little bit differently. Turbo Frame's job in the world is to separate the page into smaller pieces and then treat navigation inside that smaller piece as though only that small piece is being updated. So I'm going to make a simple change here and then I'm going to explain it. So the change that we're making here is Workshop 01 is the branch. If you switch to that, you'll see the code changes I'm about to make. And we're going to get this inline editing with no client-side, writing no client-side JavaScript at all, and writing barely any Ruby. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go into our Rails application here, and we have the file here is app views concerts _ concert, which is the standard Rails path for a partial, for an active model partial. This is the partial that draws. Can you see my pointer when I drag my pointer? Showing my screen is drawing this. Concert is drawing the individual line of concerts on the screen. And all we're going to do is we're going to wrap that entire thing in a Rails helper, which is defined by the Turbo Rails thing, which has already been installed here. So it's Turbo Frame Tag. we're going to give it a DOM ID as an argument. The DOM ID is of the concert, local object concert. And we're going to give it a do, so it takes a block. So like a lot of Rails helper partials, this is a wrapper for a HTML tag, and the internal block is the body of the tag. And this will re-indent everything. So everything is wrapped in this turbo frame tag, DOM ID concert, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the same line of code, and I'm going to do the same thing in the underscore form, same directory. This is the form page. Again, like I've already set this up, so it kind of will work in line. So there's not a whole lot of manipulation that needs to be done here. We're just going to wrap it again. So wrapped in this turbo frame tag. And there's one other change I need to make. The concert controller. We're just going to change the concert controller. We're going to change the show method so that it looks for an argument which is actually part of the form already. It's going to look for an inline, and if it gets the inline, it's going to do the special behavior of rendering the partial. Otherwise, it'll do the default behavior of rendering the entire show page. Okay. And with that, oh, sorry, one other change. I need to change the update, the create behavior and the update. You change the create and update behavior. Actually, this should work. Redirect to concert. Let's see. Refresh the page. We'll see whether that change should be unset. Params inline is my thing. It's the form is adding it. The form is adding it as a hidden. Sorry, the cancel link is adding it as a hidden because the cancel link is forcing a re-show of the page. I am using Microsoft Edge on Mac. It's better than Chrome, and the dev tools are better than Safari. So now what would happen here is when I edit, the form now appears in line. I'm not redirecting to a new page. I've got the form in line. I can prove that by saying inline edit. I update. I do need the show. Dang it. There's one other change I need to make, and I'm going to pull. Sorry. Sorry, the update needs to become a redirect and redirect to concert rather than rendering the concert. I want to redirect to, sorry, instead it is currently a redirect and it needs to be a render. It needs to do that same inline render concert. Rather than redirecting. So edit, update. I am failing at pasting my own code into my own application, which is distressing. Sorry. Okay. There we go. Sorry, the update needs to change to render the same concert partial. We're passing in the current user as a local because that's the way the partial works. So now with having written no custom JavaScript, we now have an editable inline edit. I can make a change here, update it, and the change update happens in line. I can edit and cancel. The cancel also needs the same. This actually also needs the same. The same issue there. Thought I had fixed the slides and I had not. Edit, cancel. So, okay. Resetting here. Where's my Zoom window? Where did I put everybody? I lost the window where I can see everybody, which is mildly disturbing.
It sometimes glitches out. You have to look at your bottom tray and then click on the Zoom icon.
Yeah, I see. All right, I see it there. All right, there we go. Got you again. If you the application, so a question in the channel was the example of a real website or app where this technology is useful. The flagship for this technology right now is Hey.com, which is the email program that Basecamp put out that this was extracted out of. And it uses it extensively. And some of the later examples, especially in the book, come very similarly off. Even the favoriting thing here, some of the pieces of this are pretty similar to what Hey.com uses. I think other than that, the technology is still new enough that I don't think a whole lot of people have publicly incorporated it into their sites. Okay, so let me explain how this works, because it seems very mysterious that we've got basically we wrote a couple lines of Ruby and now all of a sudden we have this interactive form, inline form. What happened here is if you look at the, if I inspect the HTML that gets generated here, that tag has created, I hope this is readable. That tag has created a custom HTML tag called turbo frame. And the ID is the DOM ID that we've put in. The source is, I think, also being defined at the same time by the DOM ID. What is happening here is that any navigation that takes place inside a custom turbo frame tag is captured by the turbo JavaScript library, and it behaves like turbo drives does, but for this particular turbo frame. So it makes the HTML request. I'll show you the request. I'll show you on the edit screen. It makes the HTML request. We get a normal request. The response is the actual full edit page. You can see this. It's the full edit page with the header, but this turbo frame inside it that we added. And it looks for a turbo frame tag with a matching DOM ID, and it takes the inner HTML of that and it puts it inside the inner HTML of the turbo frame where we had it. If I do the update, I get the same response here. I get a turbo frame, and it just takes that response and it places that inner HTML inside the existing turbo frame with the same DOM ID, with no other effort required. Okay. That's pretty cool. Inside a turbo frame, all navigation stays within the frame. There's a problem with that, which is that some of this navigation I don't want to stay within the frame. This name here is a link. There's the replacement HTML happening in the browser. I'm not sure what you mean by that. It's happening the same way the turbo drives happens. Like turbo is capturing the HTML request, it's grabbing the HTML response, and it's doing a replacement. It's doing inner HTML equals, basically, of the inner HTML of the frame in the browser. So it's a very simple, the turbo frame tag is a custom web component that is defined by the turbo.js library. Yeah, turbo is running. So the installation here which I didn't really get into because it's a little time consuming to talk about in detail. But Webpack here, I have Turbo Rails running. This is the main pack file for this application. And so it loads the Turbo Rails library, and then the Turbo Rails library sort of automatically picks this stuff up. The Turbo Frames tag is defined. There's separately a Turbo Rails gem that defines the Rails side helpers that we're using, and then there's a Turbo Rails. Then there's the Turbo JavaScript library, which is loaded by this line and handles the client side piece. Does that make sense? The question is, does it degrade gracefully if the user has JavaScript disabled? Streams doesn't, yes and no. Like the whole point of this is that it's supposed to be a progressive enhancement. So if you have a site that is basically standard Rails, these are ways to do enhancements. So in theory, you have the non-enhanced version of the page to fall back on. In practice, if you're depending pretty heavily on the streams behavior, it's going to be kind of tricky, and it's not quite gonna work. But if you can set it up so that it will back up and degrade into the like standard HTML behavior. Is that making sense so far? It is called, the Turbo Frame doesn't have, so the question is, why is it called frame? Does it have a connection to real HTML iframes? Only sort of a metaphorical connection. They called it a Turbo Frame because they think of it kind of the same way as like an HTML iframe, but it doesn't have any structurally, it's just a string. Like they just happen, the Turbo.js code defines a custom HTML tag and they happen to call it Turbo Frame, so that's what it looks for. And they think of it internally the way that they kind of, you would think about an iframe as like a container for a certain chunk of the page, but there's no like browser. The browser doesn't know anything particular about Turbo Frame tags other than we've asked to generate them. So the inline param here is actually, it's just a weird, the question is, why am I using the inline param rather than just showing the regular show page? That's sort of a weird quirk of this application because the regular show page, actually is this, and it doesn't have the partial. If I were to redirect to the entire like schedule page, it would like render the entire schedule page and Turbo Frames would pull out the one Turbo Frame that I was interested in, and it would work fine. It would just be slower. So sorry, I had a request to just quickly look over the changed code. So yeah, the only changes to the code we made was that the concert and the form, both got this Turbo Frame tag helper, which is defined by the Turbo Rails library, wrapped around them, and that generates this Turbo Frame HTML. And the concerts controller was updated to, the show page was updated to render the concert partial. And the update was also changed to render the concert partial. If it's disappearing for you, the update you probably didn't get this update change in and you're getting an error. If you get an error, or if you get any response that doesn't include that Turbo Frame, then you get a blank space, so it looks like it vanishes. So the problem that we have right now is that Turbo Frames is capturing, yes, sorry about that on the form update, on the updates. The problem right now is that each Turbo Frame is capturing all of the navigation inside of its block. And that has two problems because we have two things in here that want to navigate outside this frame. These headers are supposed to be links to the display page. I can show you in a new tab and that'll work. They're supposed to be links to this page that shows all the ticket sales. But in fact, if we click on them right now, this will just go away because they're not Turbo Frames and we're now inside a Turbo Frame. So let me refresh. Similarly, if I click on the favorite button, it will update this thing to make the favorite button say remove favorite, but it will not update the top of the page to update the list of favorites. Okay. But TurboFrames gives you a couple of workarounds to get to special case navigation that you don't want to stay within the frame. So so if you go to the Workshop 2 branch, you can see those workarounds. If you go to the concert partial, you look at the link to the concert name, the link to the concert name, and you just add one new data attribute, data turbo frame top. Data turbo frame is an attribute that TurboFrames looks for to determine what turbo frame the navigation should adjust. Like the default of TurboFrames is that any navigation inside a TurboFrame will work on the TurboFrame with that DOM ID. And if you don't want that to be your default, then you use data TurboFrame to update it for a particular link or form submission. And in this case, we're using a special case value top to say replace the entire page. So if I refresh here, and now if I click on this link, it will refresh the entire page and we'll get normal navigation. For the form submit, this make favorite, which is a button, we need to, there's a couple things that we need to do. One of which is we need to take the partial that is drawing the lists, which is in favorites, the list of favorites. So, okay, is top something that's predefined? Yes, top is predefined by Turbo. Can you pass 2 frames? Not with this tool, but with the next tool. If you need to do more than one thing at a time, then you need to use Turbo Streams. We'll get to in the next second. If I take this inline that is covering the list, and I also wrap it in a turbo frame tag with its own DOM ID. So favorites list, I'm giving it a static DOM ID name of favorite concerts. And if now that this is now a turbo frame, if I go to the button that does if you need to do more than one thing at a time, and if you need to change the state, of more than one frame, of more than one place on the page, then turbo frames, then you use turbo streams rather than turbo frame. Looking at the button here, the make and remove favorites, and we just need to add one more attribute here to give the data turbo frame to these. I'm going to change the indentation here to make this a little clearer. Again, I'm adding the data turbo frame attribute here to the form that this button manages. And now if I reload the page, I forgot a comma. The favorite now works again, make and remove. But it actually, you'll notice that although this navigation, so what this is doing now, the make favorite, is it's now doing a turbo frame navigation where it is looking for favorite concerts as the turbo frame. So if you look at the network, if I look at the network tab here, let me clear it, and I click on make favorite, I get a response. That is actually the entire page, and it's pulling my favorite concerts turbo frame and pulling my one concert into it. So it is updating this turbo frame. It is not any longer updating this turbo frame, which is why this button no longer says remove favorite, or it did not change to say remove favorite. It still says make favorite. So what we need to do at this point is what we want to have happen here is when we make something a favorite, we actually want it to do two things. We want it to update the list of favorites, which it's already doing, but we also need it to update this bottom part, the existing display, because the existing display needs to toggle the button from make favorite to remove favorite. Does that make sense? Okay. I actually didn't get all the controller changes in. Okay. So that takes us to, in order to get this to work, we need to use turbo streams. And this is a good point. This is the 1040 part, and I'm going to take a 10-minute stop talking break and come back at 1050, and we're going to show turbo streams. If you have questions, I'll ask questions. I know that some of that went pretty fast, and then I kind of fumbled some of the code changes. I'm going to come back in at the workshop 2 branch and convert it to the workshop 3 branch. But I'll take a couple minutes for people to either catch up or ask questions or get a drink of water or whatever else you want. I'm going to get a drink of water because my voice is dying. So the favorites was working. So the history here is that the favorite was working originally. We added the turbo frame to get the inline edit, and that broke the favorite functionality. And then we partially fixed it by adding another turbo frame, and now we're going to completely fix it by adding a turbo stream. Yeah, Maddie, that's all right. When we update the concert, yeah, we update the concert. We want to do both. We want to re-render both the list of favorites and the inline partial. Yeah. So the question is, yes, this could be handled by using the top value and getting a full page refresh. The streams is better because it's a bit more efficient. And as you will see, hopefully, if we'll get far enough, because you're not reload right now, because when the thing was reloading the full page, for example, if you had other edits open, it would redo the edits. If you only update part of the page, then existing edit forms aren't disturbed. Also, we're also going to hopefully get far enough to add some animation. So what we're going to animate in the favorites and animate them out. And that's a little bit trickier to do if you're redrawing the whole page. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit easier to do if you're only redrawing part of the page. If we get far enough, which we might not, another thing that this enables, which Hey uses quite a bit, is action cable behind the scenes to make it really easy to trigger the same partial page refresh on another browser. So you can have 2 browsers open and you make a concert a favorite in one of them, and it updates the other browser using action cable, which again is a little bit harder to do in a full page update. The other thing to stress right now is that we have written no custom JavaScript so far and aren't going to for a little bit. And we have largely repurposed code that we have already written. I am going to back myself out of these changes back into workshop 2. Which updates the controller, the favorites controller a little bit. It's the same kind of change where we're forcing it to render the partial rather than do the default render. Be possible to slides a little bit. I can try and keep the slides a little bit more in place. Most of the time, the slides have a lot of the content that we're already doing in the editor, but I can try and keep as much of this active as possible. We really don't need the console very much. If a turbo frame request fails, it usually just silently, as you saw when I was having trouble with the errors, it just silently makes the frame sort of disappear because the error response doesn't have any, doesn't have the matching turbo frame in it. The inline, what's my take on the inline flag? The inline flag is kind of a hack, which is left over from the book version of this. If you have a better way to do view variants to do the right thing automatically, I would do that. I would consider that inline flag to be sort of a hack. There's almost certainly a better way to do it. The book version of this code is a little bit more complicated and talks about installation a little bit more and has a couple more steps. And there's a couple things in this that are probably sort of leftover remnants of that. This is making me think that this has great applications for error alerts, like rendering console inside of an area live region. Can you also re-render inputs with error states after submitting them? I think you can with turbo streams. I'm not sure turbo frames is the best way to do it. Is there something specific the project is using Rails UJS for? Rails UJS is still stuck around for a couple of things. Rails UJS still has the like Rails cross-site token, but I wouldn't use it for like the Rails. If you're using a Hotwire site, then I wouldn't use the UJS remote stuff or the UJS Ajax tags. There's still a couple of pieces of it that haven't been pulled out. The most notable of which I think is the CSRF tag. Originally, they said deprecate UJS and take it out. And then people were like, oh, but there's still a couple of pieces of functionality that it has that you need. And they didn't put it back. There's actually also a little bit of weirdness right now with Webpacker being in late beta. So if you're using the most recent Webpacker beta, there's a little bit of an inconsistency between the original Rails definite setup for stuff and the way Webpacker 6 wants things set up. It's just something like it'll hopefully work itself out in a month or so, but yeah, Hotwire with remote true is bad. Yeah, I didn't really super go into the setup on this on the grounds that that's like a huge time suck, but there's a couple of pieces of this. There's a gem Hotwire Rails that installs Stimulus and Turbo. It has a separate installer. I'm also using the beta 6 version of Webpacker. The beta 6 version of Webpacker, you cannot use the tilde thing with the Webpacker betas right now because Webpacker released pre-versions, which Bundler thinks are newer than beta versions, but they actually released them as older than beta versions. So you have to be really careful and make sure that you actually get beta 6 because they've been making a bunch of breaking changes. Yeah. A couple of other questions before we pick back up. Does Turbo Streams do anything to ensure order of updates? Turbo Streams does ensure that updates happen in the order they come down. If multiple things are coming down from different places, like through different action cable things, I'm not sure it does anything in particular. Does Rails become less overwhelming with time? Yes, but it never becomes not overwhelming. If you have a project that is currently using something like React, can you start adding Hotwire in piecemeal? Yeah, I think you can. I think you can if you like have a separation between the parts of the code that are using React and the parts that are using Hotwire. you can definitely do that. If they're like on top of each other, I think that's going to be complicated, but probably doable. It's also true. The question is whether Webpacker has made Rails harder than it used to be. I think that's sort of true, but I also think that's a reflection of the JavaScript world. The Rails core team has actually been working really hard recently to make Hotwire loadable using the asset pipeline. So as long as you're not using TypeScript or anything weird like that, you can use Hotwire Rails just on the asset pipeline, and it will load Stimulus and it will load Turbo, and it will work in like super modern browsers. There's a module lookup issue that they're trying to get the browsers to catch up on, but the Rails team is like really, the Hotwire team is really trying to get this to a point where you don't need a build tool to run it. But the problem, yeah, it's a long-term problem of sprockets being maintained and the Webpacker team keeping up with Webpack, and like trying to make it possible to interact Rails with the larger JavaScript world, of which Webpack is kind of the entree to that. Like, I think Webpacker is a really good layer on top of Webpack, but I think Webpack is super complicated and it's just a hard thing it's a hard setup. Webpacker 5 will work with Hotwire, but Webpacker 6 changes a bunch of defaults, and this code is against Webpacker 6, which is not really going to affect anything we do here, but it does affect, like, they changed the code location for the packs, and they've changed a couple of other their API things. But Webpacker 5 absolutely will work. Okay. I'm going to start moving. I'm going to move forward again. We will see how far we can get. But I do want to get through at least TurboStreams and talk about what TurboStreams does. I'm currently on the Workshop 02 branch, and I'm going to make the code changes to change it to the Workshop 03 branch. Yeah, that is what I'm going to do. I'm trying to get my windows in place. Make sure I can see you and see everything. Okay. So, thank you, Josh. So TurboStreams solves the problem that we are having right now, which is that we want to start making arbitrary changes to our page based on a form submit, rather than just changing the one frame. We want to change a couple of different things at a time. We might want to replace the DOM in some places. We might want to append something to a DOM. We might want to remove a DOM element. There's a lot of different things that we could try and do. And TurboStreams is the way to do all of them in one request. So TurboStreams allows us to change multiple page sections in multiple different ways in one payload. And the way TurboStreams works is it is another custom HTML tag. So there's a custom HTML tag TurboStream. There's a wide variety of helpers defined by the Turbo Rails gem to help us write this TurboStream thing set up. It has an action and a target, and then a template. The HTML that we're sending goes inside the template. The action is update, append, prepend, replace, remove. And the target is the DOM ID of the item on the page that you want to apply that action to with that HTML. So TurboStreams is a little bit different from TurboFrames in a couple of ways. And I think it is possible that some of this will get smoothed out over time as more people use it. But the current setup here, TurboStreams, you can have multiple TurboStreams payloads in the same response. So you can have multiple of these TurboStream tags in a response, and they will all get executed one by one. TurboFrames can only affect the one DOM ID. TurboStreams lets you do an append and a prepend or a remove. TurboFrames really only updates. TurboStreams will match any DOM ID. TurboFrames generally only match other TurboFrames. turbo streams will match any DOM element on the page. And turbo streams happen automatically, but only on a form submit, and actually only on a 200 form submit or 300 form submit. Turbo frame happens on all navigations. Turbo streams are explicitly and deliberately only happen on form submission. I don't necessarily completely understand the reckoning behind that. The idea is like form submissions are where you get massive page changes because they've changed the server state somehow. I don't 100% buy it, but that's the current setup. The difference between update and replace is that one of them update manages inner HTML and replace changes outer HTML. So it replaces the element itself. Yeah. So the turbo stream processing does not happen on normal GET requests. What happens is the way that this works internally is that the Turbo client-side library puts a custom header into the form submission before it goes forward. Rails captures that header, can treat it as a format, and then the response that comes back from something that's submitted with that header is processed by the Turbo Streams part of the Turbo library. So let me show you what that looks like. Ideally, you're reusing a lot of existing templates in this Turbo Stream. But since a Turbo Stream submit is a Rails format, the same way .html is a Rails format, you have .html or .json, you also now have .turbostream. Turbo Rails allows you to use that, which allows you to use a lot of Rails default. So the change here is that we're going to go into the favorites controller and we're actually going to take out the response to create and destroy, which is going to cause Rails to fall back on its default behavior for create and destroy. The default behavior for Rails is to look for an ERB template that is like action.format.erb. So we are going to create a TurboStream, create.turbostream.erb and create and destroy.turboframe.erb. So we're going to go in here into the view for favorites. I'm going to create a new file. Let's create TurboStream stream.erb, and I'm going to put a little bit of Rails helper magic in here. I'm pasting this from the git change request. It's not that I typed this fast. So sorry, catching up. TurboStream is also usable for real-time functionality over Action Cable. So Action Cable broadcasts also go through the TurboStream processor. It's pretty nice to do that. I'll show. Hopefully, we'll get to that. So what I've got here are two helpers, creating a TurboStream with an append action, TurboStream with a replace action. So the method here is the action being done. The first argument is the target, it's the DOM ID. And then any remaining arguments are the render thing. So in this case, we're rendering the favorite partial. And in this case, the inside of the block is what's getting rendering. We're re-rendering the concert. And we're doing that inside the block because we have to pass the user. Favorites have a user and a concert. So what is happening here is that this TurboStream is going to both append and replace what we needed to do. And let me create the other one for destroy on remove, which happens when we remove a favorite. And the destroy one is actually very similar because we're still doing the same replacement, but instead of at the top of it, we're removing the DOM ID from the favorite. So if I did this right, we still haven't written any JavaScript, and this should work. Something did not get concert. Oh, I remember I know what the other problem is. I need to make this at favorite. I need the favorite partial. I need the favorite item. So I click make, And now you see that this both updates up top and it updates the bottom here. If you look at the network tab, let me clean this up and you can look at the network. You can look at the network tab and see that I've got the response I've got is a turbo stream with the action append, the target favorite concert list, and then template, and then the favorite partial. And then below that, turbo stream with the action replace, the DOM ID of the concert partial, and then the text of the concert partial with the remove favorite button. And if I do it again with the remove favorite, I actually get just the remove action and then the replace action. So let me stop here for a second. Tony, if you said that all this is not making things easier for most of what we do for a user, that is a failure on my part to like explain how like easy this is compared to the JavaScript pieces. Like we have written, and also because of the way that I'm doing this in steps, I think is making this look a little bit more complicated than it actually would be in practice. Like I've got this favorite thing doing client side up, back and forth. And again, I've written no custom JavaScript. I'm just using the form submission that I already have. It is a different mindset if you're used to the current client-side paradigm of thinking about things in terms of client state. And it can take a little bit of getting used to, but it's significantly less code to write. And it is, a lot of the effects are really easy to use once you get used to the helper methods. So, I mean, let me move forward here. Let me go back to my screen here. So again, now we've got turbo streams up here for making this come and go, and we're updating this in a couple of different places. The book example actually also updates a count in the navigation, which is a little bit more complicated than I wanted to do here. So this gets us to where we started. And now what I want to do is add animation. I want to make these things animate in and I want to make them animate out. You can actually do this on a full page load, but it's a little bit easier in here. So this is now going towards branch workshop 4, and we're going to use the animate CSS library, which is already installed. So don't need to reinstall it. And all that we are going to do here to make this animation work. So we want something to animate in when it is updated, but we don't want to make it animate in when the page reloads, because that's going to be a little bit distracting. So on the initial page load, we don't want it to animate, but we do want it to animate in when the user hits favorite. So what we need to do here is just animate the animate in bit. The animation CSS library works by adding some CSS classes. So all we're going to do here is that we are going to the book examples are for modern front end. Yeah, sorry. Question: I did not update the make favorite button. No, I did not update it. It was the pre-turbo stream. It was just not being updated, and now it is being updated. So you can see that it changes. Not because I changed the description of the button, but because now it's redrawing this bottom partial from the turbo stream. If I go into the favorite partial here, and I'm just going to add a local for whether I want to animate it or not. Oops. And then I'm going to add in, and replace the article here with a little bit of, replace this article with a slightly different version of it. So what I'm adding here is, if the animated in is true, I'm adding in the CSS class to animate slide and write. It's holding the DOM ID, and I'm sticking the animate out animation that I want in a data attribute because I want to hold on to that for a second because the animate out is a little bit tricky and I want to talk about that for a second. Question was percent minus. It doesn't display it and it also does not create a new line. So now if I reload the page and I do the make favorite, it does not, what the heck? I'm having a bad live coding day. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one other change. I need to actually change the turbo stream to send in that animate in list. So I'm adding the create turbo stream. I want to change the append to render the favorite, and I want to pass it the animate in true partial. So I've just changed this. It's doing the same render of the same default partial. I'm now passing in one local variable for the animate in. The partial is then taking that animate in and adding to the class list with the animate.css animation. And now we animate in. So now every time I make something and make favorite, it animates them in. If I refresh the page, the animation does not happen, but the animation out does not happen either. And the reason for that, the reason the animation out doesn't happen is because the reason why animation out is a problem is because the turbo frame removal is happening before this turbo stream remove is happening before we have the opportunity to put the animation CSS class in to do the animation. So I would not expect you to generate this on your own. I did not generate this on my own. I adapted it from a piece of code that was on the stimulus, the Hotwire board. I'm going to go into the application.js manifest file, and I'm adding a chunk of code here. The important part here is that this is capturing a turbo event that you can hook into before a stream gets rendered. You can hook into, turbo stream defines a handful of events that you can add listeners to. So here's the before stream render. What we're doing here is, I don't need the console log. If the action of the target, so the event here, the event target is the turbo stream itself. If the action is remove, we keep on going. We grab the target frame. We look for an animate out data set. And if we do that, then we add the animate out data set and add an event listener so it actually does the removal after the animation runs. This snippet I grabbed from, it was in the Hotwire dev forum was where I grabbed this from. So could I do a turbo stream replace with, hold on. All right, let me show this and let me then catch the add to the questions. So with this in mind, it's doing, if you see here, it's recompiling Webpacker because we've now written some custom Java, added some JavaScript. So it's going to take a second to recompile Webpacker. But now the favorite animates in and the remove favorite animates out and then makes it go away. This is at the point where this is stuff that I think would be tricky to do on a full page refresh. So now we actually are starting to see the benefit of having the partial refresh. So, okay, catching up on questions. I don't think it's accidental that this reminds people of RJS. I think that DHH always really liked RJS and was sad when the rest of the world abandoned it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that like a lot of this stuff recapitulates the idea of writing a lot of Ruby code, because I think that one of the things about the Rails core team and the Basecamp team is they like Ruby and they like writing Ruby. Yeah, so for snippets, if you go to hotwire.dev and you go to like the turbo page and the community, there's a discussion server here that has a lot of, it's not super high traffic, but there's some pretty good stuff here. And it does have some pretty good stuff of people trying to figure out how all this stuff works. The core teams are on it, at least occasionally. DHH is on here sometimes. Sam and Javan, who are the Stimulus and Hotwire leads, Stimulus and Turbo leads, answer questions on here sometimes. So that's one of the places that I look. Could you do turbo stream replace with a version of the object that does ham animate out true and then immediately do a turbo stream remover that happened too quickly? I think it would happen too quickly, but I would probably play around with it. This stuff is pretty easy to play around with. Okay, the animation library is animate.css. Let me show that. It made my life a lot easier once I discovered it. It's at animate.style, and it defines a bunch of nifty things that just sort of that you can get to sort of work just by adding CSS animations. I like it quite a bit. I've used it a little bit. I haven't used it a ton, but I like it quite a bit. Where are we? We have about 20 minutes left and miles to go before we sleep. Really appreciate you sort of hanging with me today. I hope this, I sort of always knew this was going to be a fire hose, and I hope it is not a like overwhelming fire hose. I hope that you're getting both like some sense of how to do this and some sense of why I think this is like really fun and easy to play with. I'm going to try and do the action cable setup now. Again, this code base was deliberately set up for you to use afterwards. Like everything is installed. It should basically just work. There are a bunch of stimulus examples here that are going to go a little bit farther than we're going to get to go through here today. So I like really encourage you, if this is at all interesting, to use this as like a building block tool to play around with. And try and understand why things are happening and mess around with it. It is set up to be where everything's installed. So let me show you the action cable bit. I think we'll get to it, and then that will be a good stop place. This is workshop 5, and what I want to do here is I want to add a second browser logged in here. Now the problem right now is that if I favorite one browser, the other one doesn't update, which is sad. I mean, it updates if I refresh the page, but I prefer to have it just sort of happen. This is actually very similar to what, if you look at like the original Hotwire video that David did of a chat room, this is based on it. And also Hey uses this pretty extensively. If you use hey.com at all and you use it on multiple browsers or multiple devices at the same time, they all update, and this is what it does. So what I'm going to do here is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually install, I'm going to run Redux. Sorry, I'm going to install Redis in the background, just using this Docker command. If you're not comfortable with this and you don't want to follow along at this point, that is 100% fine. We can set it up later if you can set it up later if you'd prefer. But we need to get Redis running in the background because it handles the background jobs. Docker, which is not my favorite thing in the world, is definitely the easiest way to get this set up, because you can just do that one line Redis latest and get it going. And now Redis is running in the background, and Action Cable will use it in the background to manage this. So Action Cable is the Rails library for WebSockets. If you don't want to use Redis, you can change your cable.yaml file to have the development adapter be async, and I think all of the examples here will work. But Redis is a little bit easier here. Docker is not my favorite thing in the world. I find it hard to set up, but if I just have the one line thing where it just runs Redis and I don't have to install it, then I like it. Okay, so there's two parts to this. You have to subscribe to, so Action Cable works. I'm not going to get really deep into Action Cable because the internals of Action Cable are a little bit separate from what we're doing here. But Action Cable works by subscribing to channels and streams. None of the bits at this up till now have depended on Action Cable at all. We're going to explicitly use Action Cable now. One other thing to notice here that you've seen already is that all of the partials have been scrubbed to not use current user. And the reason for that is that when Redis tries to background render these partials, current user is no longer available because we're outside of the session. So rather than like tediously walk through all of the things that we had that used current user, it's already preset to not pass current user to partials that Action Cable is going to set up. So in order to subscribe to the Action Cable changes, we need to make one change to the schedule display form, the schedule display page, which is schedules.show. And all we need to do is put at the top of it a helper that is defined by TurboRails, TurboStream from, which subscribes you to a special TurboStream Action Cable channel based on the name of all of the elements. It basically concatenates all of the elements that you put here. And if it has a like 2 params, then it uses that. So this is going to be based on the user ID, and it's going to append favorites to it. The other weird tricky part about this is it actually encrypts the name of the TurboStream so that it can't be spoofed. But if we reload the page right now and we go into the elements, we go into the source, it will have a little bigger TurboStream cable source, another custom thing, the channel name, which is the Action Cable channel, and then the signed stream name, which is the encrypted version of basically user_3 favorites, which is what this would sort of like. This essentially works the same way that the DOM ID helper does. So we then need to send stuff. And the weird thing about this, and I think that people are going to have very different reactions to this, is that the TurboStreams, the TurboRails helpers gives you a bunch of active record helpers that allow you to automatically have TurboStreams broadcast something when the active record changes. So there's a couple changes that I need to make to make this work. And again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to kind of blow through this. I'm now in the active model class for favorite.rb at models. I'm going to throw in a couple of active record callbacks. I realize that you've probably been told not to use active record callbacks, and you have probably been told not to put display logic in active record, and we are about to do both of those things. And all I can say is like that this is the way the Rails core team sees the world. You can actually do this through controllers or through other things. It just provides a bunch of helpers to do it in the application model. So what this is doing is when a favorite is created, we are going to this TurboStreams channel. We're broadcasting to it. This is the same name, and we're rendering a create partial, which we will actually build in a second. And on destroy, we are rendering a destroy partial. There are actually much more succinct helpers here. If you are in the setup where like you are sending something on create destroy on all of the commits, create update destroy, which we don't have an update commit, and they're all rendering the same partial and they're all going to the same DOM ID. There are very short shortcuts. You can just say like broadcast to user favorites and it would all just work. We're not quite doing that because our situation here is a little bit more complicated. So we're explicitly calling a render function to make this work. So we're going to change our TurboStream. Actually, just going to create new TurboStream. Actually, I think we can just change this. We can just change this from being an actual file to being a partial. Hold on, I'll get to the questions, but I want to get this working first. The other thing that we need to do is in the controller, we need to change the result so that it is not also sending the result via the controller, because what would happen is that we would get the regular result, and then we would get the action cable result, and it would double book things. It would double display things. So I'm just changing the create and destroy to return an OK header. These will save or update, save or delete the favorite, which will then trigger the callback, which then renders the partial, which calls the turbo stream. I don't know why she swallowed the fly. There's a cascade here of what's going on here. But assuming I have not made a typo, this should work. I'm going to update both of these pages, and it should, let's hope. Errored? What did it error? Oh, it errored because I left these as the IVARs, and they need to be locals because there's no instance to be set, and we're explicitly passing them from the model here. We're explicitly passing it from the model here as a local. So let me do this again. If I make this favorite here, I am clicking on the left side, and the right side is also updating simultaneously. There we go. So again, we've written like basically no custom JavaScript. We've written extremely little custom Ruby. And we now have communication between arbitrary number of browsers running this stuff. This is where to me this really starts to get cool. Let me go back up and catch up on questions. So do we need to have them in the models? The answer is no. You actually could do this same. You can do the same TurboStreams channel call basically anywhere. The reason it's in the model, the reason I have this in the model is because actually like there are extremely good shortcuts in the model. If you're doing like standard Rails thing and you're updating the same partial to the same DOM ID and all of this stuff, if you have set this up to do this, there are really good succinct shortcuts that are available in the model. Can you imagine David doing DHH doing TDD on active record callbacks? No, I cannot. They explicitly don't unit test some of this stuff. There are tests that's a whole nother issue. View component also works really nice with these. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does. Yeah, so Hotwire with sessions. So this is a problem with Hotwire with sessions because at the point that this create is done, it doesn't have access to the session. So anything that you would need to the session, you need to sort of pass along to the model. So yeah, sometimes they suggest that you can write concerns and add the concerns to the Random model if you're planning for reuse, and that would also work well. It also works with service objects. To put this broadcast in a service object would also work. Okay. So can we make an executable broadcast on a controller? Yes. Yeah. You can do it in the controller. Again, like it's just that first of all, the model thing is sort of the preferred mechanism from the core team. So I wanted to show that. And second of all, we're not quite set up to use them here, but there are really succinct shortcuts. And another advantage of this is it actually captures, the good and bad thing about this is it captures model changes from other places, like any place that this favorite, like if I were to run a background job and delete this favorite, I can actually do that. It would remove both of these. If I go into, let me go into the console, see if I can actually show this. Go into the console and I find the last favorite here. So there's only one favorite. And if I do favorite last destroy, so I'm going to see if I can show this. What should happen here is that it should trigger a broadcast to both browsers. We'll see. I've never tried this, so this is definitely live. Boom, there we go. I did it, and both browsers updated. So yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with doing it in the model myself. My normal rule is to like try it the way that they want, the tool makers want to try it. at least once, and then see if I can do better myself. That does seem like a really good place to stop moving forward on, because the next piece is describing stimulus, and that's going to take a while. I love stimulus, so we are welcome to I'm happy to talk about that later on. But I think we're sort of running out of time here, so I can take explicit questions and put up my last slide. I just lost my. I was set to do this in all the windows, and then I didn't realize the Zoom window was going to sit on top of everything. So give me 1 second here. Play slideshow on window. So okay. Okay, here we go. So books, and then I'll take a couple questions. So anyway, so sorry, you can follow me on Twitter at Noel Rapp. Please do. I like followers. There's also an email newsletter at buttondown.email/Noel Rapp. It is free, basically, although if you want to subscribe and throw a tip at me, I wouldn't turn it down, but basically there's no subscriber only content. It's just free. There's 2 books. Modern Front-End Development for Rails covers everything that was covered here, plus Stimulus, plus React, plus a few other stimulus tricks that we didn't get to here. Modern CSS with Tailwind is a very short 70 some odd pages guide to Tailwind. They are both coincidentally 50% off the ebook with the tag code Modern Web 2021. That is only through Wednesday, I think. So I would get on that if this is at all interesting to you. At least in a book, you can pause me and shut me up, which I think at this point is a strong incentive. The book is up. The CSS, the Tailwind book is heading to production, print production. The Hotwire book is in review. I just got a bunch of technical reviews back, and I'm replacing based on them, and it will go into production in about a month or so. Let me go back over here and look through the other questions. So if you have questions and you want to put them in the Discord, I'll try to get them. Is this demonstration in the book? Yes, this is the book example. The book example does things in a slightly different order, and also integrates React with the action cable stuff, and then goes further. We use Stimulus. So just to go the Stimulus, we start to use these things, these buttons at the top as filters. We do the search using Stimulus and Hotwire combined. And then we do a pretty cool thing to sort. You notice if you put these favorites up, they're not sorted. They just come in at the bottom. We use Stimulus to automatically sort them when they come in, which is a very similar trick to what Hey.com does. So there's a bunch of other stuff in the book. How would I compare turbo streams to stimulus reflex? I think they're trying to solve similar problems in a slightly different way. I have nothing I don't know the stimulus reflex stuff very well. I think they were trying to get some automatic stuff into Stimulus. It seems like a fine tool. I haven't used it very much. So yeah, so I would, if you're interested, I would try both of them. I don't have very much example with Stimulus Reflex. I love Stimulus as a library. I think it's extremely well designed and very nice for the kinds of things that it does. Do I have a snippet of code using the action cable broadcast in a controller? No, but I think if you took the callback and just pasted it into the controller, I think it would work. It would also, I think, work from creating it from a model. What's the best approach for having user-specific data in Turbo Streams since the streams are rendered outside the session? For instance, only allowing comment authors to edit and delete links on a comment. I think that what I would probably do is you need to make sure that you can do it. You could do this here as is. If you look at what the favorites are doing here, a favorite has a user. So the favorite has a user. I think you need to assume you probably need to do your authentication stuff before in the session, before the create and destroy happens, before the model gets called. And then any other context you kind of need to do in the by passing the user essentially to the render. By making it, and what happens here is the user is a part of the favorite, or in Hey, the email is attached to a user. So the user's context is available. It's just not available through the current user global. Once you get turbo streams, is there really a need for turbo frames? Turbo frames, so I would give a slightly different answer than DHH would. DHH considers turbo frames to be the main use and turbo streams to be an add-on. I find in practice that most of the things that I try to do with it, I kind of outgrow frames fairly quickly, but it is simpler. And there's a certain set it and forget it. There's also a thing you can do with frames that I didn't get a chance to show, where you can give the frame a source attribute and it loads, lazy loads when the page renders for the first time, which enables you to cache the static parts of the page and then let turbo frames automatically fill in the dynamic parts. That's a thing that you can do during using turbo frames that you can't really do with streams. That's helpful to have. So there we go. Do I know of any way to add turbo without turbo drive? I'm not sure, but I bet there's a way to kind of turn it off. So it's stimulus reflex is more like spot use of JavaScript with Hotwire turbo utilizing the server CRUD actions. I think that's fair. Hotwire is very much about server-side rendering. I think stimulus reflex is an attempt to give you more reactive kind of behavior in stimulus client side. I will also note that the 2.0 version of stimulus that has the automatic callbacks on change values covers some of what stimulus reflex does. Any guesses what will be in Strata? They said that Strata is relatively straightforward, and I think it is just some like scaffolding to move things back and forth between web views and native views. But I don't know the details of that in much detail. They've also said that you can actually, they've said that you can build native stuff using Hotwire without Strata. Strata just makes some stuff easier. Writing tests. For the book, I use Cypress to do end-to-end tests. The stimulus team explicitly does not make it easy to unit test stimulus controllers for reasons that I don't necessarily agree with, but they're their reasons. But Cypress or Capybara for end-to-end testing should work for any of this stuff. That kind of takes us to time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. The Modern Web 2021, I'll post that in the channel a little bit later on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much for sticking with this. I hope this was a good beginning to your conference experience. Thank you for being part of the Rails community, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and the rest of the workshops. I will be on the Discord server basically as long as the Discord server is there. Also on Twitter, my DMs are actually open on Twitter. If you ever have a question, I'm generally reasonably responsive as long as you have a reasonable question. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.